For many, revisiting a childhood home or hometown is a wishful idea quickly buried beneath busy schedules and various responsibilities. However, for Mrs. Watts and Pete Masterson's The Trip to Bountiful, it is so much more. It is her constant prayer. The longing and desire she has to revisit the small rural town of Bountiful, Texas, is evident throughout the entire film, and Mrs. Watts' journey home distinctly reflects all 9 expressions of prayer discussed in Josh Larson's book, Movies Are Prayers: How Films Voice Our Deepest Longings. Based on Horton Foote's play The Trip to Bountiful, the 1985 film featured Geraldine Page as Mrs. Watts, the feisty widow hell-bent on a final visit to her Texas hometown. Page won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance as Mrs. Watts, and Horton Foote was nominated for an Oscar for the screenplay as well. It is through Mrs. Watts' determination, quirks, and interactions with the other characters that the audience is able to see different types of prayers expressed. The film starts with Mrs. Watts living with her only son Ludi and his wife Jessie May in a small one-bedroom apartment in Houston during the 1940s. Ludi tries to keep the peace between his restless mother and domineering wife, but has minimal success. Mrs. Watts has begged Ludi to take her back to Bountiful, but he knows that the town has all but disappeared. Suffering from heart issues, Mrs. Watts is kept under the watchful eye of Jessie May and has never made it farther than the bus station in her attempts to make it home alone. However, when the opportune moment presents itself, Mrs. Watts sneaks away and makes the journey to Bountiful. One of the first types of prayers reflected in this film, and one that is easily seen throughout as Mrs. Watts makes her journey, is the prayer of yearning. At this point in her life, with her friends and family all but gone, Mrs. Watts is very aware that she won't be on this earth much longer, and she longs to see Bountiful again before she dies.
Will not be that way. I want to go home.
Prayers of lament can be seen at the beginning of the film. Both Mrs. Watts and Jessie May express their lament of their current living situation and react to one another out of spite. While Mrs. Watts wants to return to her roots, Jessie May is wishing she and Ludi could lead a more lavish lifestyle.
I know we couldn't afford it before, so I kept quiet about it. But now that you're working again, I don't think a picture show once or twice a week would break us.
The Trip to Bountiful also offers up prayers of anger. In Job 7, Job speaks to God saying, "I will speak out in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." Jessie May offers up this type of prayer more than any of the other characters.
You make her pick that up.
I won't.
You will. This is my house, and you'll do exactly as you're told.
Foote brilliantly contrasts Jessie May's prayers of anger with Mrs. Watts' prayers of joy, which further divides their characters and makes the payoff of their reconciliation at the end of the film even more rewarding. Mrs. Watts takes to singing hymns throughout the film when she is thinking of what brings her the most joy, home. And one of her most joyful expressions comes directly after singing Blessed Assurance.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God. Born of his spirit, washed in his blood. Ah, nice to be able to sing a hymn when you want to.
One of the most stirring and thought-provoking moments in the film occurs when Mrs. Watts offers up a prayer of meditation or contemplation when talking to Thelma.
Wonder why the Lord's not with us every day. Sure would be nice if he was. Well, maybe then we wouldn't appreciate it so much on those days when he is with us. Or maybe he's with us always and we just don't know it. Or maybe I had to wait 20 years cooped up in the city before I could appreciate getting back here.
The heartfelt connection that the ladies make allow for prayers of confession to happen as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, honey.
It's all right. I'm just lonesome for him is all.
These confessions evoke sympathy and a greater understanding of each other, allowing their relationship to grow stronger. However, the most impactful prayer of confession comes at the climax of the film when Ludi finds his mother sitting on the porch of their old farmhouse. Mrs. Watts brings up the past, and Ludi tries to avoid going down memory lane with her. But it's not long until he can't help but confess.
I haven't made any kind of life for you, Mama. Either of you. And I try so hard. Mama, I lied to you. I do remember. I remember so much. This house, this life here.
It's after this prayer of confession that the audience can see the prayer of reconciliation that brings Mrs. Watts' journey to Bountiful to a close. Jessie May has made a list of rules that she demands Mrs. Watts to follow to the letter.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. That's the first thing on my list. There'll be no more running away.
There'll be no more running away.
Good. Number 2, no more hymn singing when I'm in the apartment. When I'm gone, you can sing your lungs out. Agreed?
Agreed.
Mrs. Watts faces her future with composure and acceptance of her fate, having made the trip to see her home again and regaining her identity and self-worth in the process. Jessie May's steps towards reconciliation with her mother-in-law come only after Ludi finally takes a stand for peace and puts an end to their bickering about Mrs. Watts' pension check.
Well, give it to me before you go and lose it again.
I'm not going to lose this.
Oh, now, don't start that business again. Just give it to me.
Jessie May.
Look, I'm not going to do it.
We are going to stop this wrangling once and for all. You have given me your word, and I expect you to keep your word. We have to live together. We'll live together in peace.
The movie ends before a prayer of obedience is fully recognized, but as they silently and peacefully drive away from Bountiful, it can be assumed that along their journey of reconciliation, Mrs. Watts and Jessie May will also attempt to heed Ludi's words. In their positive obedience and maintaining the peace, they will begin to experience that which feels like a blessing and not a burden. The finality in Mrs. Watts' goodbye to Bountiful as she walks to the car also hints at her obedience to things out of her control, like the passage of time and the resulting progression of society. If prayers of yearning are sensed whenever Mrs. Watts speaks of Bountiful, then prayers of praise are seen whenever shots of it are on screen. The opening credits and the final moments of the film both depict the beautiful fields of Bountiful, and the beauty of those images speak to the love Mrs. Watts has for her home. It is not hard to understand why the filmmaker includes lingering shots of the land in the film. It is to highlight the beauty and essence of the life once lived in Bountiful that has captivated Mrs. Watts. Larson suggests in his book that when movies genuinely yearn, mournfully lament, fitfully rage, honestly confess, or joyously celebrate, they serve as prayers. The Trip to Bountiful does all of these things and wonderfully captures the prayers of an old woman just wanting to go home.